She was a servant branded astray, hiding the blood of a lost heir and a scar that whispered of destiny. He was an Alpha King trapped by tradition, his heart bound by instinct to the one he should never claim. When betrayal, prophecy, and war collide, they must fight not just for survival, but for love that could unite warring packs or ignite a war that consumes them all. One scar, one crown, one choice that will change everything. The feast blazed with gold and firelight, laughter rolling across the long tables where nobles of the Nightshade Dominion drank deep from silver chalices and tore into roasted venison. Yet in that storm of revelry, Selene moved like a shadow no one wished to see, her head bowed beneath the weight of her servant's collar, her palms raw from carrying platters that seemed heavier with every sneer she endured, her scar hidden beneath the rough sleeve of her gown, her breathing measured and shallow so as not to draw attention, for she knew the sting of attention far too well. Still, fate never left shadows undisturbed, and when her path crossed Veyra's chair, the hall seemed to hush before the storm, the venomous she-wolf's lips curling in cruel delight as she extended a jeweled hand to stop Selene mid-step, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Clumsy stray, you walk among us as if you belong," and in one fluid, vicious motion, Veyra's claws tore down the seam of Selene's thin dress, fabric shredding like paper, gasps and mocking laughter erupting as Selene froze, her breath strangled in her throat, her scarred skin laid bare to the hall, her heart hammering as she wished for the ground to devour her. Shame burned her cheeks while Lyra and Dira's giggles pealed like bells of cruelty, voices chanting, "Stray, stray, scarred stray," as if the words were knives. But before she could collapse inward under their scorn, before her silence became her coffin, a sudden heat enveloped her shoulders, a weight heavy with authority, and the laughter stuttered into silence when the Alpha King himself rose from his high seat, his cloak draped across her trembling form, his eyes burning with a fury that did not waver, his voice carrying through every stone in the hall, deep and final as thunder. "She is mine." The words cracked the air, shattering the illusion of her invisibility, dragging her into the center of power where she had sworn never to stand, and the crowd recoiled as if struck. No one daring to laugh now, no one daring to breathe too loud under the steel of Kael Draven's gaze, a gaze that lingered not on them but on her, as though the scar they mocked was a crown only he could see. And Selene, lost in the echo of his claim, felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, every whisper of disbelief slicing into her back, every stare burning her skin, but none of it louder than the ragged thrum of her own heartbeat. Then Kael's hand, warm and unyielding, closed around her wrist, pulling her away from the dais, past the stunned nobles, past Veyra's wide-eyed silence, his stride unrelenting as she stumbled after him, cloak dragging against the floor like a banner of defiance. And as the heavy doors groaned open, sealing the hall behind them, his mouth lowered near her ear, his words of vow and a sentence entwined. "From this night on, you will not leave my sight." The doors had hardly shut behind them when Selene felt the air shift, the roar of the feast muffled to a distant echo, leaving only the thunder of her own heartbeat. Kael's hand was still locked around her wrist, unrelenting, as though even the stone corridor itself might conspire to steal her away if he dared let go. The silence stretched between them, sharp and heavy, yet alive with words unspoken. His steps were purposeful, each stride pulling her deeper into the darkened hallways, away from the eyes that had watched her humiliation. Selene's legs trembled with the effort of keeping pace, but pride kept her from stumbling. The warmth of his cloak pressed into her skin, carrying the scent of smoke and cedar, a scent too powerful, too intimate. Every servant they passed bowed quickly out of sight, as if afraid to be caught staring. Her ears burned with the memory of the hall, with the way the logs. Idar had died when he claimed her. She could still hear the words echoing in her skull. "She is mine." She tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip only tightened. The gesture was not cruel, but it carried weight, authority, the unyielding certainty of an alpha. At last he stopped before towering iron doors flanked by guards. The guards exchanged quick, startled glances at the sight of her, but Kael's glare cut their curiosity to silence. He pushed the doors open with one hand, never releasing her with the other. The chamber beyond was vast, rich with tapestries and furs, shadows flickering where firelight licked the carved walls. Selene stumbled as he drew her inside, the door slamming shut behind them like the final beat of a drum. She pulled the cloak tighter around herself, not for warmth, but for modesty, the memory of Vera's claws still raw against her skin. Kael finally released her wrist, though his presence did not withdraw. His storm-gray eyes lingered on her, unblinking, unreadable. Selene stood near the hearth, every muscle taut, refusing to look away, though her body screamed to shrink into the shadows. The silence between them pressed like a storm about to break. Her voice cracked the stillness, quiet but sharp. "You should not have done that," she whispered. Kael's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady, low, dangerous. "I will not be told what I should or should not do," he said. "I answer to no one. And neither, from this night on, will you." The words struck her harder than any cruelty Vera had ever spoken. Freedom wrapped in chains, a gift she had not asked for, a sentence she could not escape. Her hands trembled against the cloak's edge, though she fought to still them. "You've painted a mark I cannot erase," she said, her tone breaking between defiance and despair. Kael stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "Their laughter died because I ended it," he growled. "I will not see you torn apart for their amusement." Selene flinched, not from his nearness, but from the raw truth in his voice. It unsettled her more than cruelty would have. She had lived her life invisible, safe only in silence. Now he had ripped that silence from her. She tried to steady herself with anger, clinging to the only defense left to her. "I am no one," she hissed softly. "A stray, nothing more. You've made me their target." His gaze burned hotter, fierce and unrelenting. "You are not nothing." The conviction in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. He spoke it as though it were a fact carved into stone. Selene looked away, unable to bear the weight of his certainty. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing sparks that seemed to leap in rhythm with her racing heart. Kael moved past her, shrugging off his own armor with slow, deliberate movements. The leather creaked as he placed it aside, every motion commanding, deliberate. Selene watched in spite of herself, caught between fear and fascination. His presence filled the chamber, as if even the walls obeyed him. When he turned back to her, she felt pinned, though he had not touched her. "You will stay here," he said, his tone brooking no refusal. Selene's lips parted, outrage breaking through her shock. "You would cage me?" she demanded. His eyes narrowed, but his answer was calm, firm. "I would protect you." The word struck something deep inside her, something fragile she had buried long ago. She shook her head, forcing a bitter laugh. Protection? Or possession? His silence was telling, but not cruel. He studied her as though the answer mattered more to him than he wished to admit. At last, he stepped closer again, until his breath brushed her cheek. "I will not let them touch you again," he murmured. The vow trembled with violence barely restrained. Her chest tightened, torn between relief and terror. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had ever stood between her and cruelty. It should have comforted her, yet it only made her world spin faster. She clutched the cloak tighter, her eyes stinging. "I don't belong here," she whispered. Kael's hand rose, hesitated, then brushed the edge of her scar where it disappeared beneath fabric. The touch was feather-light, reverent almost, but it burned through her like fire. His gaze locked to hers, unwavering. "They will learn you do," he said. Selene's breath caught, trapped between denial and longing. Her lips trembled with words she could not form. The chamber seemed smaller now, the air hotter, the silence louder. She wanted to flee, yet her feet would not move. Kael turned toward the window, his voice roughened. "You will stay here until I say otherwise." The command was simple, absolute. Selene's fists clenched at her sides. She hated the pull of his authority, hated how her body obeyed even when her mind rebelled. "I am not your prisoner," she said, sharper now. He glanced back, the faintest hint of a smirk at the corner of his lips. "No," he agreed softly. "You are mine." Her heart stuttered, fury and fear clashing with something darker, something she dared not name. The fire popped in the hearth, as if mocking the silence that followed. She turned her back to him, staring into the flames, refusing to let him see her break. Her thoughts swirled with images of the feast, the laughter, the weight of his cloak. What had he done? What had he made her in the eyes of the Dominion? Her life of invisibility was gone, shattered in a single night. Kael moved toward the door, his shoulders broad, his presence overwhelming even in retreat. He paused, his hand on the iron handle. His words came without turning back. "Rest. Tomorrow, the whispers will begin." Selene's throat tightened, the truth of it pressing down on her. He opened the door, and the torchlight from the corridor spilled into the chamber. For a moment she thought he would leave her in silence, but his voice returned, low, final, and binding. "From this night on, Selene, you will not leave my sight." The door shut, and she was left trembling in the flicker of firelight, the Alpha's vow echoing in her bones like a brand she could never escape. The fire crackled softly, throwing restless shadows against the walls as Selene stood frozen, the weight of Kael's final words anchoring her in place. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart beneath the borrowed cloak. The silence of the chamber was suffocating, broken only by the occasional pop of resin in the hearth. She had been left alone, yet she did not feel alone. His presence lingered like smoke in the air, filling every corner, even though the door had closed behind him. Selene tried to steady her breath, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. She moved to the edge of the hearth, sinking onto the fur-covered bench as her legs threatened to give way. Her body ached from the night's ordeal, though the deeper wounds were hidden beneath her skin. She pulled the cloak tighter, as if its warmth could shield her from the truth she had no choice but to face. Her life had changed with one declaration, and there would be no undoing it. The memory of Kael's voice still rang in her ears. "You are mine." She closed her eyes, shaking her head as though the words might fall away if she refused to hear them. But the echo remained, relentless. The flames blurred as tears threatened, though she blinked them back with stubborn force. She had cried enough in silence. She would not do it here, not where he had marked her as his. The room itself seemed alive, the carved wolves on the walls staring down at her like silent witnesses. She rose abruptly, pacing across the rug, desperate for motion to quiet the chaos in her chest. Every step reminded her of the binding she had not chosen, the invisible tether now drawing her closer to a man she barely understood. Her fingers brushed the iron latch of the window, but it was sealed shut from within. Of course it was. No escape, only walls. She pressed her forehead against two. A cool stone, whispering into the silence. "This is not my life. This cannot be my life." Her words dissolved into the emptiness, unheard by anyone but herself. The night outside was endless, the stars sharp as knives against the velvet dark. She wondered if freedom still existed beneath that sky, or if Kael's vow had stolen it forever. The chamber grew colder as the fire settled into embers, and she curled onto the bench once more. Sleep hovered at the edges of her exhaustion, though her mind fought it fiercely. When her eyes finally closed, they filled with visions of the feast, of mocking faces, of Kael's hand gripping hers like iron. She dreamt of chains and crowns, of running through endless forests with footsteps always behind her. The sound of the door opening dragged her from restless sleep. She jolted upright, her breath quick and shallow, clutching the cloak around her. Kael stepped inside, the light of dawn spilling in behind him. His gaze flicked to her immediately, assessing, unreadable. "You did not sleep," he observed, his voice rough with early morning. She did not answer, only pulled the cloak tighter, her eyes wary. He crossed the chamber with slow, deliberate strides, as though he owned not just the room but the air between them. A tray of food rested in his hands, bread and fruit and a steaming cup that carried the scent of herbs. He set it on the table near the fire, his movements careful, almost gentle. Selene's stomach twisted with hunger, but pride rooted her to the bench. Kael noticed, his jaw tightening slightly. "You will eat," he said, not as command, but as certainty. She lifted her chin, forcing strength into her voice. "I do not take orders." His eyes darkened, though his expression remained calm. "And yet you are still here," he murmured. The truth of it cut deeper than she wished to admit. She rose slowly, her bare feet brushing against the furs, as she moved toward the table. The steam from the cup reached her first, carrying warmth she did not want to crave. She took the bread, her fingers brushing against the rough crust. But her gaze never left his. Kael watched in silence as she brought it to her lips, his expression unreadable. The first bite felt like surrender, though hunger drowned the sting of pride. He seemed satisfied, though he said nothing more. Instead, he moved to the window, unfastening the heavy shutters to let in the pale morning light. The chamber brightened, though Selene winced against it, her eyes adjusting slowly. The world beyond looked vast, mountains rising like teeth against the horizon. It felt both beautiful and suffocating, a kingdom too large for her small existence. Kael's voice broke the silence again. "The whispers have already begun," he said. Selene stiffened, her chest tightening. She knew he was right. His claim had set tongues wagging, and her name would spread like wildfire among those who despised her. "They will not forgive you for this," she whispered. He turned to her, his eyes unwavering. "I do not need their forgiveness. And you," he added softly, "do not need their approval." Her throat tightened, words caught between denial and longing. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she needed nothing from him, but the lie would not leave her tongue. Instead, she turned back to the food, chewing in silence. The fire cracked again, filling the void their words left behind. Kael leaned against the stone arch, arms folded across his chest, watching her with a patience that unnerved her. She felt like prey beneath his gaze, though not prey he meant to kill. The thought unsettled her more than danger ever had. She finished the bread quickly, avoiding his eyes, then pushed the tray away. His brow arched slightly, though he did not question her. At last, he spoke again, his tone lower, edged with steel. "You will walk with me today." Her heart stumbled, fear and defiance warring within her. "Into their eyes?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Yes," he answered, aired simply. "They must see you at my side." She shook her head, panic flaring. "They will tear me apart." "Not while I stand beside you," he replied, and there was no doubt in his voice. The words were not boast but promise, heavy and unyielding. Selene wanted to argue, but the memory of last night silenced her. He had ended their laughter with a single sentence. What else could he end if he chose? She sank back onto the bench, her hands trembling again despite her will. Kael approached, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "You fear them," he said, not as accusation, but as truth. Her lips parted, but no denial came. "Yes," she whispered finally. His gaze softened, only slightly, a flicker she almost missed. "Then let them fear me more." The chamber seemed to still, as if the stones themselves bowed to the vow in his voice. Selene's breath caught, and for the first time, she did not look away. The Alpha's eyes held hers, and in them she saw not only dominance, but something quieter, something dangerous in its gentleness. Her chest ached, torn between fury and fragile hope. The morning sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light that could not banish the shadows inside her. Kael rose, his presence towering once more. "Dress," he said quietly. "We face the court together." The command was simple, but it left her trembling, for she knew the moment she stepped beyond this chamber, the life she once knew would vanish forever. The sun had barely climbed higher into the sky when Selene felt the first ripple of unease stir through the halls of the Nightshade Dominion, whispers trailing behind her like shadows, 1,000 eyes tracking her every step. Yet she could not name the source of the tension until Vera appeared in the corridor ahead, her lips curled in that venomous smile that promised no mercy, and behind her, Melis and Dira, flitted like dark moths, their laughter soft but cruel, their eyes bright with anticipation as they let loose rumors like poisoned arrows, whispers meant to gnaw at her resolve, to remind her of her place as a branded servant even beneath the cloak of Kael's protection, yet every word, every glance, carried the sting of a calculated attack, and Selene moved with careful precision, keeping her posture straight, her gaze forward, pretending not to notice the cold gleam in Veyra's eyes, pretending not to hear the jabs that were not really words but weapons, the laughter that stung sharper than claws, and still the shadow of the Ashfang crest on the hidden token pressed against her chest like a weight she could not shed. The small piece of cloth that Thane had delivered into her hands at night, a reminder of a past she could barely trust, a past she was not yet ready to claim, yet could not deny. She tried to steady her thoughts as she approached the council chamber, the air thick with tension, the walls adorned with carved sigils of ancient power, and every step echoed against stone like a drumbeat of warning. But when she entered, the room's atmosphere was already charged. The council gathered, Elder Morvayn seated at the high dais, his expression sharp, calculating, the epitome of control, his eyes glinting with predatory delight as though he had sensed the moment of her exposure long before, and Selene's stomach twisted, instinct screaming that danger was now a tangible presence, pressing against her skin, pressing against every nerve, and Veyra's whisper reached her, low and venomous. "Your cloak cannot save you here, Starborn." And Selene's pulse spiked, her mind racing with strategies, with excuses, with desperate plans that could not protect her from what was coming. The council chamber grew quieter as Elder Morvayn's voice rang out, carrying authority like a blade, and though Kael's presence loomed behind her, she could feel the weight of every eye on her, some curious, some hateful, some shocked, and Morvayn's words cut deeper than claws, deliberate and public. "The Ashfang token has been discovered, read, and with it, the truth of this stray." And he lifted the small cloth, letting the embroidered crest catch the light, the symbol of a lineage hated and feared by all within the Dominion. And murmurs rose like a tide, low at first, then swelling with venom, until they became shouts, accusations, demands for blood, the council members leaning forward, faces twisted in outrage, and the room seemed to tilt beneath Selene's feet, the air growing heavy as though the stones themselves conspired against her, and she could hear Veyra's triumphant smirk even from where she stood, the whispers stabbing her ears. "Traitor, spy, Ashfang." And Selene's hands clenched at her sides, knuckles whitening as she struggled to remain upright, to remain calm. Though every instinct screamed for flight, every instinct screamed that survival had always meant hiding. And yet here she stood, exposed, branded by truth, by heritage, by fate, and all the while, Elder Morvayn's voice continued, loud and precise. "By law, she dies at moonrise." And the room erupted into chaos, the pack roaring like a single, furious beast, some pounding the benches, some shouting for immediate execution, their fangs bared in the metaphorical sense, eyes burning with inherited hatred, their voices blending into one relentless cry for blood, and Selene's knees threatened to buckle, the token in her hands suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, as though it bore the weight of her entire existence, her past and the future she had never imagined. And Kael's hand settled briefly on her shoulder, grounding her in the storm, though his own expression betrayed the storm within, a mixture of rage, fear, and indecision, as the Alpha who had claimed her now faced the impossible demand of law against instinct, the eyes of his pack burning into him, the council pressing forward, Elder Morvayn's gaze cold and precise, calculating the unraveling of everything Kael had begun to build, and Selene felt her throat tighten, fear mixing with a strange, defiant fire, a determination to survive not for herself alone, but for the fragile hope she had begun to sense in Kael's presence, the unspoken promise that perhaps, just perhaps, she was not alone, even in the tide of fury that threatened to consume her. yet the words hung in the air like a guillotine above her head, the execution by moonrise certain, inevitable if law prevailed, and the murmurs turned into roars, the pack calling for her blood like a storm gathering strength, and every heartbeat thundered in her ears as she tried to think, to plan, to breathe, the world tilting beneath the weight of revelation, the truth of her lineage now a weapon wielded by Elder Morvain, and Kael's presence behind her, steady yet tense, his hand brushing hers almost subconsciously, grounding her, warning her, reminding her that she was claimed, that she was not defenseless even against the fury of an entire pack, and as Morvain's proclamation echoed again, by law she dies at moonrise. Selene felt the room shrink, the walls closing in, her vision narrowing to the storm of faces, the chorus of hatred, the relentless drumbeat of her own fear, and Kael's deep, rumbling growl vibrated through the space between them, low and dangerous, a sound meant to remind the pack that the Alpha would not yield easily, and though his fury was restrained, it reached her ears like a promise, like a shield, like a challenge, and for the first time, the terror in her chest mingled with something else, a spark, a pulse, a reckless courage she did not yet name, and she realized that survival would demand more than stealth, more than silence, more than hiding, that she would have to claim her own presence, her own voice, in the face of law, in the face of bloodlust, in the face of Elder Morvain's meticulous cruelty, and the whispers of Vera's triumph, all of it pressing down, yet failing to crush the ember inside her, and Kael stepped forward then, his form blocking her from the roaring council, his shadow falling across her, protective and possessive, torn by duty and instinct, his gaze locking with Morvain's in a silent battle of wills, and every muscle in Selene's body hummed with anticipation, fear, and a strange electric hope, as she realized that the night's trials were only beginning, that the law could not save her, that the pack's fury could not diminish what had already been claimed, and in that moment, the chamber seemed to hold its breath, the roar of the pack quieting just long enough for the tension to be unbearable, for the weight of the inevitable to press upon her like a stone, and Selene's hands shook not with weakness, but with the intensity of what was to come, the precarious balance of life, love, and power teetering on the edge of the Alpha's decision, and Morvain's words still rang in every corner of her mind, clear, cold, merciless, and final. By law, she dies at moonrise, and the storm of emotions within her collided with the storm outside the chamber as Kael's eyes softened ever so slightly, his hand tightening on hers, and she understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber of judgment dissolved into a blur of stone and echo as Selene was dragged from the council hall, the roar of the pack fading behind her like a storm receding over jagged cliffs, her wrists bound with iron that bit into her skin yet felt lighter than the weight in her chest, her steps unsteady as she descended the cold spiral stair into the bowels of the Nightshade Keep, the air turning damp and metallic with the scent of rust and old sorrow, torches guttering against walls carved with the sigils of forgotten prisoners, shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the stones, and she kept her eyes ahead, refusing to look at the guards who would not meet her gaze, refusing to see herself reflected in their pity or contempt, the memory of Morvain's decree still pulsing through her like a wound that would not clot. By law, she dies at moonrise, each word a drumbeat beneath her skin, and yet as she stumbled into the small cell, at the base of the stairs she found the silence almost unbearable, the slam of the iron door behind her, an echo she could not outrun, her breath trembling as she pressed her palms against the cold stone, feeling its grit beneath her fingers, its chill seeping into her bones, and she sank slowly to the floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn to her chest like she had done as a child when the nights were too long and the shadows too deep. And flashes of memory flickered like fragments of a dream she had tried to forget. Her grandmother's voice murmuring lullabies of stars and wolves, her small hands clutching a wooden carving of the Ashfang crest, the warmth of a hearth long vanished, the prophecy whispered as if it were a prayer, a prophecy she had once dismissed as a story meant to soothe frightened pups, now echoing in her head with cruel clarity. One marked by moonlight will bridge the blood and the fang. And she pressed her forehead to her knees, trembling, trying to breathe, trying to anchor herself in the present, when every sound in the cell whispered of endings, of inevitability, of blood spilled beneath the moon, and she wondered if this was how it was always meant to be, if her life had been nothing more than a path leading here to this narrow space, these iron bars, this suffocating air, and yet her heart beat stubbornly, painfully, as though defying the script written for her. And in the darkness she thought of Kael, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes when Morvain had spoken, the way his jaw had tightened like a man standing on the edge of a blade, and she whispered to the stone, "Then let it be for something." Her voice small yet steady, as though speaking the words aloud might make them real, might make her death a thing she chose instead of a thing done to her, and the cell answered only with silence, the torches flickering faintly. In the hall beyond, their light falling in bars across her face like the very shackles she wore, until at last footsteps echoed down the stair, slow at first, then heavier, more deliberate, a rhythm. She had already begun to recognize without meaning to, and she lifted her head, her breath catching as Kael's shadow fell across the cell, taller and darker than the others, his presence filling the narrow corridor like a tide, and when he stepped closer, the torchlight revealed his face drawn tight with exhaustion, with fury, with something heavier than command, his eyes fixed on her through the iron, his hands curling around the bars as though they were the only thing keeping him upright, and for a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them taut, humming with everything unsaid, until she rose slowly to her feet, her chains clinking softly, her chin lifting, though her heart trembled, and her voice came low but clear. "Then let me die for something," she said, each word like a stone falling into a still pool. "If peace can be bought by my blood, let it be so." And Kael's breath shuddered, his grip on the bars tightening until the tendons stood out in his hands, his head bowing for the barest moment as though struck. And when he lifted his eyes again, they burned, not with anger, but with a pain so raw she could barely meet it, his voice rough, almost broken. "Do you think I want your blood spilled to soothe their fear?" And she flinched at the sound of him, at the weight of his guilt laid bare in the dim light. But she stood her ground, her hands trembling at her sides. "It does not matter what you want," she whispered. "The law is clear." And Kael's jaw clenched, a low growl rumbling from somewhere deep in his chest, his fingers curling tighter around the bars until the iron groaned under the pressure of his grip. "The law," he said, the words tasting like ash. "The law has never saved anyone worth saving." And for a heartbeat they simply stared at each other, the silence between them heavy with things neither could name, the flicker of torchlight catching the glint of her scar where it curved like a crescent moon along her wrist, a mark that had once been a secret now bared to the world. And Kael's eyes dropped to it, then rose back to hers, something unspoken passing like a spark. And Selene swallowed, her throat dry, her heart loud in her ears. "Then why are you here?" she asked softly, and Kael exhaled, his breath a tremor. "Because I cannot." He stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "Because I will not watch them take you." And his voice cracked on the last word, a fracture she had never heard in the Alpha's tone before, and it cut her deeper than anger ever could, her own eyes burning though she willed them dry, and she shook her head slowly, her chains rattling like distant thunder. "You cannot stop it," she whispered. "Even you cannot." But Kael stepped closer, his forehead almost touching the bars now, his breath harsh, his eyes burning. "Watch me," he growled, low and dangerous, a sound that sent a shiver through the stones themselves, and she opened her mouth to speak but found no words, the space between them alive with everything they were not saying, everything they could not be. And yet something inside her shifted, an ember stirring despite the cold, and Kael's fingers slipped from the bars at last, curling into fists at his sides as he drew a long, ragged breath, his gaze still locked on hers, and without another word, he turned sharply, his cloak flaring behind him as he strode down the corridor, his footsteps a drumbeat of defiance echoing off the stone. And Selene pressed her hands to the bars, watching him go, something in her chest both breaking and igniting all at once, the torches flickering wildly as though the air itself had changed with his departure. And though she did not know what he would do, she felt the shift as surely as she felt her own pulse, a current rising against the tide, and above the cell the council chamber would already be filling again, voices rising, demands sharpening, Elder Morvain waiting like a spider in its web. But Kael's voice would soon cut through it like thunder, his presence rolling over them, his decision a blade drawn in daylight. And as she sank back against the wall, her chains cool against her skin, she whispered to herself, to her grandmother's memory, to the prophecy she had once dismissed, "If this is the end, let it be my choice." Her voice trembling yet fierce, and somewhere above her, Kael's declaration rang out, clear and defiant, echoing down through stone and shadow, a promise and a challenge all at once. "Then I will not kill her. I will invoke the trial of Dominion." The arena's gates groaned open, and the first rush of air carried the scent of dust, blood, and anticipation, filling Selene's lungs with a tension so thick it made her chest ache, the gathered wolves pressing close to the edges of the pit, their eyes gleaming with fury and expectation, teeth bared and claws digging into stone as if the arena itself were alive and hungry, and Kael's presence in the center drew all gazes, his shoulders broad, his stance taut, every movement a testament to control, power, and unspoken menace, while across from him Dorian emerged like a shadow from the crowd, massive, snarling, the muscles beneath his fur coiled like steel, eyes gleaming with a mix of malice and challenge, and Selene felt the first flicker of fear light in her chest as he bared his teeth and let loose a growl that resonated through the stone walls. Yet Kael did not flinch, his eyes fixed on the opponent, calculating, predatory, and the moment stretched taut, a breath held across the expanse of the pit, the silence punctuated only by the shifting of paws on stone, the whisper of wind, and the low hum of tension that wrapped the arena like a living thing. And then Dorian lunged, a blur of fur and claws, and Kael met him with a roar that split the air, a sound that was more than warning, more than challenge, a primal echo of dominion that sent a shiver thus. Rough every wolf present, and the clash was brutal from the first strike. Claws scraping armor, teeth snapping, fur flying, and Selene's breath caught as she realized the violence she had only ever imagined in nightmares was now real, and her pulse raced with every strike, every dodge, every retaliatory blow Kael delivered, his muscles straining, sinews taut, blood already beginning to stain his tunic and the stone beneath their feet. And Dorian was relentless, a whirlwind of power and rage, pressing Kael back step by step, forcing him to bend, to twist, to draw upon every ounce of strength and strategy. And Selene's claws of fear dug deep. Yet something unexpected stirred within her, a resonance, a call that tugged at the corners of her mind, at the depths of the wolf she had kept hidden, kept silent, kept chained beneath fear and years of obedience. And she felt it rise, a pulse, a heat, a presence that filled the arena with a hum she could not name, and Kael faltered for a moment, exhaustion washing over him as Dorian's claws nicked his shoulder and chest. But Selene felt her wolf stir in response, a surge of instinct, of connection, flowing from her to him, strengthening, empowering, and he roared again, his strength renewed, a wild energy dancing in his eyes, and with a powerful lunge he met Dorian's attack head-on, teeth sinking, claws slashing, and the sound of flesh against flesh, of bone grazing bone, of snarls and grunts, echoed in Selene's ears until the world shrank to only the fight and the pulse that bound her to him. And though Dorian was massive, skilled, merciless, Kael's resolve, fueled by something beyond pain, beyond fatigue, became unstoppable, each strike precise, each move a calculated expression of power, and Selene's breath caught as she realized she was more than observer, that her very presence, her wolf, her heartbeat, was now entwined with his, and with a final, brutal motion, Kael drove Dorian back, claws tearing through the champion's defenses, teeth raking, and Dorian fell with a thundering crash, groaning, defeated yet alive, the ski arena erupting in shouts, cries, and howls of astonishment, and Kael stumbled backward, every muscle screaming, every breath a jagged blade of pain, blood soaking his tunic, the air thick with iron, and he fell to one knee, then another, the fight over, but the toll undeniable, and Selene ran to the edge of the pit, eyes wide, hands trembling, feeling her pulse echo his, feeling the bond of wolf and alpha, the first true stirrings of her own power, her own presence. And yet her joy was tempered by fear as Kael sank to the stone, his head dropping forward, the crowd's roar now a distant echo as worry wrapped tight around her chest, and she wanted to leap into the pit, to take his weight into her own arms, to call upon every shred of strength she had. But the guards blocked her, and all she could do was shout his name, her voice cracking, raw and unpolished. "Kael, Kael, stay with me." And he groaned, a low, ragged sound that made her chest ache, his hand brushing the stone as if the world itself threatened to crush him, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet hers. And in that glance she saw pain, fury, and a strange flicker of pride, and tears blurred her vision as she felt her wolf stir stronger. The instinct, the connection, the wild pulse of life feeding him. And he gasped, drawing in a shuddering breath, his chest heaving, blood seeping through the fabric of his tunic. Yet his eyes still held fire, still held command, still held her, and the arena seemed to hold its breath, the gathered wolves frozen in awe, the council silent in shock as the Alpha who had been nearly killed in brutal combat now lay victorious yet wounded, a living paradox of strength and fragility, and Selene's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might shatter in her chest, the bond between them humming like a drumbeat only they could hear, and the shadows of the arena seemed to pulse. With every throb, every echo of the fight, until from the distant gates a sound thundered across the walls, a rhythm unlike anything in the pit, a deep, resonant beat that vibrated through stone, through blood, through bone, and Selene froze, her breath catching as her eyes lifted toward the horizon, toward the gates, and there they were, distant yet undeniable, the war drums of the Ashfang army, rolling like a storm across the plains, a sound that spoke of blood, of vengeance, of a reckoning she had always feared but never truly imagined, and Kael's head tilted slightly, hearing it even in his exhausted haze, and a growl escaped him, low, feral, warning and promise intertwined, and Selene's pulse doubled, fear and hope clashing within her, the realization burning hot. The trial had ended, yet the true storm was only beginning, the world beyond the arena shifting, and nothing would ever be the same again. The roar of distant war drums faded only slightly as the first ranks of the Ashfang wolves appeared along the ridges, their silhouettes jagged against the rising sun, a living wall of fur and steel that stretched across the horizon, and the dominion below trembled, the air thick with panic and disbelief, voices rising in chaos, commands shouted over the clamor, guards scrambling to positions that felt suddenly meaningless, the pack's courage faltering under the weight of what they could not yet comprehend, and Selene's heart hammered in her chest, the blood in her veins matching the fiery light that bathed the arena, the connection she felt to her people, to her wolf, to her lineage, igniting a courage she had not known she possessed until she could no longer stand silent, until her voice, trembling at first, rose above the turmoil, sharp, clear, unyielding, carrying across stone, across faces, across fear. "I am Selene of Ashfang," she shouted, and the words cut through the panic like a blade, reverberating off walls and into every heart, and the Dominion's eyes turned toward her, some with shock, some with suspicion, some with awe, and she stepped forward, bare feet against stone, her fingers brushing the dust as though drawing strength from the very floor, the roar of her own pulse in her ears drowning out everything else. And then she lifted her arm, the sleeve falling away, revealing the starburst scar on her wrist, the mark that had been hidden for years, the mark that had whispered secrets of prophecy, and all eyes fell upon it, the council frozen, the soldiers uncertain, the whispers dying on lips as disbelief and recognition battled within the pack, and Selene's voice rang out again, stronger this time, unwavering. I am the daughter of Ashfang, the heir you thought lost, the one you branded as stray and servant. But I am hers, I am ours, I am the bridge between blood and fang. And the wind seemed to still, carrying the weight of her words to every corner, lifting them like a banner, and then from the ridge above the gates, a figure emerged, regal, commanding, radiating authority like a flame, and Selene's breath caught, her knees threatening to buckle as the woman's eyes met hers, sharp, discerning, yet threaded with recognition, and her grandmother, Lady Nyra, stepped down from the Ashfang ranks, her presence alone commanding attention, her voice carrying over the chaos, cool and cutting. Selene, she said, and the syllable fell like steel on stone, reverberating through the assembled Nightshade Pack. If you are truly ours. The pause deliberate, heavy, deliberate enough to make the blood in Selene's veins quake. Prove it, Lady Nyra continued, her gaze sweeping over the gathered Dominion wolves as though weighing their souls as well. Choose Ashfang, the words like fire, scorching the air. Or burn with Nightshade, and Selene felt every head in the arena turn toward her, the council frozen, guards frozen, her own pulse echoing the drums of war, the weight of decision pressing down, her wolf stirring beneath her skin, instinct screaming, heart and blood demanding, and yet her mind raced, each thought a storm, each memory of the past colliding with the uncertain future, the chains of childhood, the hidden prophecy, Kael's unwavering gaze, the trials endured, the blood spilled, all converging on this single, impossible moment, and she stepped further into the center of the chaos, raising her chin, her hands shaking but steady, voice carrying again over the din. I do not cower. I will not choose between the blood that marks me and the heart that binds me. The words like thunder, challenging the air itself, and murmurs rippled through the Dominion, shock, fear, awe, confusion, and the Ashfang ranks stiffened, their leader's gaze never leaving Selene, every muscle taut as though ready to respond to the unspoken command of the heir she had always known, and Kael's figure emerged behind her, steady, unwavering, a living shield, his eyes dark, stormy, protective, warning the Nightshade Pack against one misstep, yet silently urging Selene forward, and she lifted both arms, exposing the scar fully, the starburst burning in the morning light, and a quiet hum of recognition passed through the gathered Ashfang warriors, their breaths held, anticipation thick like molten steel, and Lady Nyra's eyes softened for the briefest fraction of a second before hardening once more, the weight of leadership and expectation pressing down upon her granddaughter, as though the choice was a blade she alone must wield, and Selene's heart ached with the enormity of the moment, the world narrowing to the space between her wolf, her blood, and the gaze of the woman who had once cradled her as a child, and now demanded proof of a legacy she had hidden for years, and the council's murmurs grew louder, uncertainty and fear twisting into anger, voices calling for her death, whispers of treachery, and deception weaving through the assembly like poisonous threads. Yet she did not falter, did not blink, her wolf rising within her, a force she had never truly felt, a power and presence that coiled through her veins, fueling every heartbeat, and she took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, her spirit, her resolve, and stepped even further forward, gaze locked on Lady Nyra, body trembling but defiant, the fire in her chest spreading, a living bond of blood and destiny igniting within her, and in that silence, the air thick with tension and fate, the words of her grandmother hung like a blade, waiting for the choice, the judgment, the leap, and Selene's mind raced. Memories of childhood, the prophecy, Kael's sacrifices, the trials, the pain, the betrayal, and the loyalty she had found in the darkest moments, all converging into one blazing clarity, and she raised her voice above the pounding of her heart and the distant echo of Ashfang drums. I am Selene of Ashfang, and I will prove it, not by choosing one side over the other, but by standing as the bridge between our worlds, by carving a path where none existed before. And the arena seemed to hold its breath, the Dominion stunned into silence, the Ashfang ranks leaning forward, the wind carrying her declaration like fire across stone and sky, and Lady Nyra's lips parted slightly, eyes narrowing, weighing, calculating, the first true acknowledgement of her granddaughter's courage, her power, her will, and Selene felt the pulse of destiny thrumming beneath her skin, the wolf stirring fully, the bond with Kael unspoken yet alive, and the moment stretched taut, a single heartbeat suspended between war and unity, between blood and honor, as the choice Lady Nyra demanded lingered, heavy and unyielding, a cliffhanger in every sense, and Selene's chest heaved, her eyes blazing, wolf and human in perfect, defiant alignment, waiting for the verdict that could shatter kingdoms or unite them forever. The air between the two packs crackled with tension, a tangible weight pressing down on Selene's shoulders as she stood in the center of the arena, the sun striking her scar like a beacon, illuminating the starburst that had once been her secret, now a symbol of claim, of destiny, and yet her heart ached with a pull she could not name. Kael's form slumped against the stone just behind her, still bleeding, still fighting the haze of exhaustion and pain, his chest heaving with ragged breaths, eyes flickering toward her, filled with the unspoken plea she could feel as vividly as the wind brushing her skin, and every instinct screamed at her to turn, to run to him, to take his hand, to stake her claim as his mate. Yet the weight of her blood, her heritage, her people, pressed against her mind and soul with equal insistence, and Elder Morvayn stepped forward, his figure imposing even against the chaos, his voice a silky poison threading through the murmurs of the assembled Ashfang elders. She has no right to command our loyalty, he spat, teeth flashing briefly in the sunlight. She is a Nightshade by survival, not by birth, and you, proud Ashfangs, would serve her at your peril. And the murmurs rippled like wildfire across the ranks, the elders whispering, glancing at each other with skepticism and doubt, and Selene's stomach twisted as doubt threatened to creep into her own mind, yet she forced herself to straighten, shoulders back, chin lifted, letting the fire of her wolf surge beneath the surface, every heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of destiny, with the unyielding pulse of blood and claim, and she raised her hands, voice ringing clear over the din. I do not come for vengeance. I do not come to split kingdoms with hatred. Her eyes swept across the Nightshade Council, the trembling soldiers, the gathered Ashfang elders. I stand here to unite us, to build from what has been broken, not burn it to ashes. And murmurs of surprise fluttered through both sides, some eyes, narrowing in suspicion, some widening in cautious hope, and Lady Nyra stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Selene, scanning the lines of her jaw, the flare of her nostrils, the fire in her pupils, as though weighing the worth of her claim, the woman's presence commanding silence as the wind carried her voice, smooth, sharp, and unyielding. Words are wind, Selene. Deeds are the test of legacy. Show us your choice, child of Ashfang, and the consequences it demands. And Selene felt the full weight of her lineage pressing on her chest, the prophecy whispering from her childhood memory, the lullabies of her grandmother echoing, urging, warning, every fiber of her being torn between the blood that birthed her and the bond that had claimed her. And Kael's low groan brought her attention back, his form shifting slightly, trying to rise despite his wounds, every inch of his struggle calling to her in a language older than words, and she shook her head, conflicted, feeling the pulse of wolf and human, of desire and duty, entwined in the storm of her chest. And Elder Morvaine's voice rang again, slicing through the thick tension. "Your hesitation will cost you more than your pride, daughter of Ashfang," he hissed. "The Nightshade wolves will not bow to a half-claimed heir." And Selene's lips pressed together as a flicker of fear gnawed at her, but she pushed it down, letting resolve and instinct rise, eyes meeting Kael's briefly, reading the mixture of pain and trust in his gaze, and she inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of her blood, her wolf, and the starburst scar ground her, letting the connection between them bloom even in the presence of peril. And she spoke again, voice unwavering. "I will not abandon the bonds I have found here, nor will I allow the ashes of vengeance to claim my hand. I stand for both our packs, for unity, for a future we can build without fear." The words ringing like a bell over the murmurs, carrying conviction that even Morvaine could not ignore. And the Ashfang elders shifted, whispers passing among them, measuring the weight of her heart against the pull of law and tradition. Lady Nyra's eyes, sharp as blades, scanning her granddaughter with the precision of one who had trained generations in survival and dominance, and then her gaze softened ever so slightly, a flicker of pride mixed with challenge, as though testing the fire that burned in Selene's soul, and she felt Kael shift behind her, a tremor in his body, a low growl vibrating in his chest as he tried to rise, eyes locking with hers in a storm of pain, warning, and silent pleadings, the unspoken bond of wolf and alpha resonating through the arena, a pulse of life that both strengthened and pained her, and Selene felt her hands clench at her sides, nails biting into palms, breath shaking with the intensity of emotion, fear, and love, the choice looming before her like a knife suspended in air, every heartbeat a drum of consequence, every breath a thread connecting blood and bond, past and future, legacy and heart. And then Lady Nyra stepped closer, her hand lifting to gently yet firmly grasp Selene's chin, tilting her face upward so that the weight of her gaze pressed into the girl like judgment and expectation in equal measure. And her voice, low and sharp, cut through the tension like a sword drawn from velvet. "Then come with us," she said, each word heavy with promise and threat alike. "Leave him, leave this cursed Alpha." And the arena seemed to still, the murmur of wolves fading into a haunting silence as Selene's heart thundered in her chest, the bond she shared with Kael screaming against the demand, the pull of her bloodline warring with the pull of her heart, her wolf rising within her, ears pricked, instincts sharpening, claws itching to mark territory, not in hate, but in claim. And Kael's form slumped slightly, pain and shock etched into his features, blood dripping, muscles trembling, yet his eyes remained locked. Ed on hers, pleading, warning, demanding, and Selene felt the ache of impossible choice twist through her soul, a knife she could not put down yet could not ignore, and she knew in that instant that whatever decision she made would reshape not just her fate, not just Kael's, but the future of both packs, the path of vengeance or unity suspended on the tremor of her breath, the flicker of courage in her chest, the fierce, raw, untested strength of her wolf rising fully. And as Lady Nyra's words lingered, heavy and sharp as the edge of a blade, Selene's mind raced, heart and blood pulling in different directions, the ground beneath her feet trembling with the pulse of expectation, the air alive with the weight of prophecy, legacy, and love, and every eye was upon her, Nightshade and Ashfang alike, the council frozen, soldiers rigid, Kael straining to rise, the wolf within screaming, the Alpha's bond calling, the heir's blood demanding, and she felt every heartbeat, every pulse, every breath in the arena synchronize with her own, a symphony of tension, defiance, and untested courage, and the cliffhanger hung, sharp and undeniable, the words echoing in her mind and blood. "Then come with us, leave him, leave this cursed Alpha," leaving her at the precipice of destiny, torn between blood and bond, past and present, love and duty, as the sun burned overhead and the winds carried the cries of thousands awaiting her choice. Selene's journey to the Ashfang camp was a blur of movement and shadow, the wagging torches along the ridges flickering against the wind, carrying the scent of smoke, blood, and earth. Each step on the rough path beneath her feet echoing the pounding of her heart, the anticipation of what was to come twisting in her chest like a living thing. And when she entered the camp, the first thing she noticed was the vastness, the organized chaos of Ashfang warriors moving with precision, eyes sharp, teeth bared, claws flexing, all instinct and discipline honed over generations, and at the center of it all stood Lady Nyra, her posture regal, her gaze slicing through the dusk like steel, and Selene felt the weight of every Ashfang elder, every warrior, every survivor of her lineage pressing down upon her, judging, weighing, measuring her worth, and Nyra's eyes locked on her, assessing, commanding, as she began the relentless questioning that would test loyalty and blood alike, the questions sharp, cold, unyielding, each one designed to peel layers of heart and resolve from Selene. To see if she would break, if she would bend, if she would sever the bond that pulled her toward Kael, and Selene answered each with measured defiance, her voice steady despite the tremor that threatened to betray the storm of emotion within her, each syllable a declaration of identity, a reaffirmation of purpose, yet always the shadow of Kael behind her mind, his face, his eyes, the warmth and strength of him lingering, and Lady Nyra's eyes narrowed, pushing further, demanding renunciation, testing if the Alpha could be abandoned, if the bond could be broken, if blood would outweigh heart, and Selene's wolf stirred beneath her skin, primal and unyielding, a pulse of instinct that refused to bend, refused to obey, and with each test, each question, each sharp probing demand, Selene felt her resolve harden, her spirit rise, a fire igniting that even Lady Nyra's authority could not quell, and she saw in the eyes of the Ashfang elders a flicker of recognition, not yet acceptance, a spark of potential that mirrored the heat of the bond within her. And while Selene was tested, Kael struggled in his recovery, every movement a battle against weakness and blood loss, every breath a testament to endurance and will, and he moved through the shadows of the Nightshade territory, preparing for a march that might claim Selene or see him lose her forever, his mind sharp, strategy unfolding, determination carved deep into his sinews, the bond they shared pulling, him forward, a tether invisible but unbreakable, and Selene, despite the trials, felt it as clearly as her own heartbeat, a call, a promise, a pulse of shared life that no Ashfang demand could sever. And she drew strength from it, even as Lady Nyra's tests pressed her to the brink, every moment a confrontation of loyalty, love, and legacy, every heartbeat echoing in the stillness of the Ashfang council tent, the flicker of torchlight illuminating the determination etched into her features, and the elders whispered, weighing her words, her courage, the unflinching fire in her gaze against the traditions they had upheld for generations, and Selene realized that her bond with Kael was not just unbreakable, it was the essence of who she was, the anchor to her soul, the reason she could endure every humiliation, every challenge, every demand, and when at last the trial of heritage and loyalty ended, she emerged from the camp as the first rays of dawn brushed the ridges, bloodied from the rites, scarred by fire and test, yet unbroken, standing tall between the two packs, the wind tugging at her hair, her cloak, the scent of earth and sweat and wolf surrounding her like a halo of defiance and power, and every eye turned toward her, Nightshade and Ashfang alike, breaths caught in the still morning air, whispers dying on lips, the weight of expectation pressing down, and Selene lifted her chin, her starburst scar catching the first light, the symbol of claim and courage, and she spoke, voice ringing clear, steady, unwavering, carrying across stone and ridge and every heart in the assembled armies. I will not belong to one throne. I will unite them both. And in that instant, silence fell like a shroud. The drums of war paused, the murmur of doubt stilled, hearts racing with anticipation and awe, and Kael's eyes met hers across the distance, pain and pride mirrored, and she felt the pulse of wolf and alpha intertwine, the legacy of blood and bond fused in that single declaration, a storm of emotion and power and promise, and the cliffhanger lingered in the air, sharp, impulse. Sybil, the future of both packs suspended on the choice she had claimed, the unity she had declared, and the dawn of a new era trembling just beyond the horizon, waiting for the world to catch up to her courage and her heart. The first hint of twilight cast long shadows across the gathered wolves, Nightshade and Ashfang alike, their breaths shallow, bodies tense, the scent of blood, sweat, and fear thick in the air, and Selene stood at the center, heart pounding, wolf stirring beneath her skin, every fiber of her being attuned to the energy around her, to Kael's presence beside her, his strength still raw from his earlier wounds yet unwavering, a living anchor of power and protection. And from the shadows Morvain emerged, eyes glinting with malice, teeth bared in a twisted sneer, hands gripping a hidden blade that glimmered under the fading light, a whisper of steel that promised death and chaos, and the council gasped, some frozen, others drawing weapons in instinctive fear. Yet Selene's gaze met his, unflinching, burning with defiance, and Kael stepped forward, his hand brushing hers, the silent pulse of bond and heart weaving them together, his voice low, almost a growl, warning and promise intertwined. "Not while I stand," and the words carried the weight of unbreakable loyalty, of love forged in trials and blood, and Morvain lunged, a streak of shadow and intent, and the fight erupted in a blur of motion, claws slicing through the air, teeth snapping, bodies colliding with a force that shook the ground beneath their feet, and Selene's wolf surged within her, instinct guiding every strike, every dodge, the fire of her blood and lineage coursing through her veins as she moved in tandem with Kael, their steps a synchronized dance of fury and skill, each covering the other, each feeding strength into the other, and the pack watched, breathless, as the Alpha and the heir of Ashfang fought as one, and Morvain, despite his cunning and power, found himself outmatched, every attempt to strike met with counter, every movement anticipated by the bond that had grown between Selene and Kael, and as he stumbled, rage twisting his features, Selene's teeth sank into his arm, claws raking, Kael's fangs cutting through his defense, and together they forced him to the ground, breath ragged, blood spilling, the duel ending in a climax of ferocity that left the council stunned. The assembled warriors silent in awe and disbelief, and as Morvain lay defeated, gasping, eyes wide in shock, the question that had loomed over both packs for centuries hung in the air. War or unity, vengeance or peace, bloodshed or alliance, and Selene raised her hands, letting the gathered wolves see the starburst scar in the fading light, a symbol of prophecy, of claim, of destiny, and her voice rang out, clear, unwavering, echoing across the ridges. "I am Selene of Ashfang, heir of blood, heir of Nightshade, and I claim my right to unite us all." And a murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief warring with hope, the elders exchanging glances heavy with the weight of history and consequence, and Kael stepped closer, his presence a storm of strength and devotion, hand reaching to clasp hers, the unspoken promise of bond and love igniting a fire that spread across the gathered packs. And as the crimson moon rose, casting its bloody glow over the scene, Kael lifted a crown, a masterwork of intertwined silver and crimson, and placed it upon Selene's head, not as Luna beside him, but as Alpha, equal in power, equal in claim, and the gathered wolves gasped, some in shock, some in awe, some in reverent silence, and Selene's chest swelled, pride and love and the ache of trials mingling as Kael's hands lingered over hers, their fingers entwined, and the moment stretched, fragile yet unbreakable, a symbol of unity forged in pain, blood, and trust. And then their lips met in a kiss that sealed more than a moment, sealing the fragile alliance, the promise of peace, the were of love that had grown amidst betrayal, trial, and war. And the packs, Nightshade and Ashfang alike, felt the shift, felt the merging of bloodlines, of hearts, of fates intertwined, and the air itself seemed to hum with the energy of what had been achieved, the tension dissolving into a cautious hope. Yet even in the glow of victory, shadows lingered at the edges, whispers in the dark, a presence unnoticed by all but the keenest senses, and a voice, low, cold, and slithering, cut through the calm like a blade. "The prophecy is not yet fulfilled," it hissed, a promise of peril and challenge yet to come. "The true war has yet to begin," and Selene's eyes flicked toward the darkness, senses alert, wolf rising in her chest, and Kael tightened his hand around hers, instincts honed, ready to defend, to protect, to fight again if necessary. And though the crimson moon bathed them in light, the threat lingered, a reminder that even victory was never absolute, that love, power, and legacy demanded vigilance, courage, and unwavering heart. And Selene's gaze swept across both packs, eyes meeting elders, warriors, and younglings alike, her voice steady despite the storm within. "We have survived, we have claimed our place, and together we will forge the future, blood and bond united." And the wind carried her declaration like a banner, lifting the spirits of both packs, hearts swelling with cautious hope, while the faint shadow at the horizon whispered its challenge, a specter of what was yet to come, the prophecy unfinished. And Selene and Kael, wolf and alpha, mate and mate, stood side by side, a symbol of unity, of love, of power tempered with compassion, the crown of night and ash resting upon her head, their bond unbroken. And the final chapter of this battle closed with a thrill of triumph, tempered by the haunting promise that the story, though victorious, was far from over. And the night hummed with possibilities, the future stretching before them like the ridges beneath the crimson moon, waiting for courage, love, and fate to continue weaving their tale.